The restaurant was built to make powerful men feel immortal. Soft gold light poured over marble floors and dark wood walls. The air smelled like expensive wine and seared steak and the quiet fear of people who knew exactly who was in the room. Dante Vescari sat at the center table not because he asked for it but because the entire place was designed around him. The waiters moved like shadows. The pianist played softly like he was trying not to exist. Even the owner's smile looked borrowed from someone else. Dante did not speak much. He never needed to. His presence did the talking for him. His suit was perfect. His watch was simple. His eyes were calm in a way that made other men lower their voices without realizing it. On the table in front of him sat a single plate still covered by a silver dome, steam slipping out in thin lines. The chef had prepared the special dish only for Dante. A gesture of respect and fear mixed together. On his right stood his head of security, a man named Marco Graves, wide shoulders, close-cropped hair scanning every corner like a machine. On his left sat a smiling councilman who believed he was important because he was sitting close to danger. Dante listened to him the way a wolf listens to a dog barking in the distance, not impressed, not threatened, simply aware. Across the room a little girl stood near the service hallway, thin coat too big for her small body, hair tucked under a knit cap, eyes wide like she had been running for days. Her name was Nora and she was not supposed to be there. The restaurant had cameras, guards, and locked doors, but Nora had learned something before she learned how to read. If a place has rules, then it has cracks, and cracks are where you survive. She held a tray with empty glasses, the kind of thing a child would never be trusted with, but no one looked at her closely because no one wanted to look at anything that felt poor or broken. Tonight she was invisible, and that was how she stayed alive. Nora watched the kitchen doors the way a prey animal watches tall grass. She had been hiding behind the pantry shelves for hours, listening to men she could not see, talking in voices she could not forget. One of them kept saying a name over and over like a prayer or a curse: Dante Vescari, Dante Vescari, Dante Vescari. And another voice answered with laughter, low and sharp, saying, make sure he eats, make sure he takes the first bite, and when he does we walk in after and everyone will think it was his heart, not our hands. Nora did not understand all the words, but she understood the meaning because she had seen poison before, not on plates like this, but in alleyways, in shelters, in cups offered by smiling strangers who wanted quiet children to stop existing. She had learned the smell of certain bitter chemicals, the way they sit in the back of your throat, even from across a room. And when she saw the man slip something into the saucepan, she felt her stomach twist with certainty. Now the plate was on its way to Dante, and the dome was about to lift. The waiter stepped forward with careful hands and a polite smile that trembled at the edges. He placed the dish in front of Dante and said, the chef sends his respects, sir. Dante nodded once, not looking at the waiter, not needing to. The waiter reached for the silver dome. Nora moved without thinking. Her feet carried her faster than fear, faster than logic. She crossed the room between tables where rich people turned their heads. Annoyed at the interruption, she heard Marco Graves shift his stance, hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. Nora did not stop. She could not stop because if Dante ate, then it would be over, and she would be next. She reached the table at the exact moment the dome lifted, steam rising thick and fragrant, and underneath sat a beautiful plate, glossy sauce, delicate garnish, a perfect piece of meat shining under the light like an offering. Nora screamed with everything in her lungs, don't eat that. The entire restaurant froze, like someone had shut off time. The pianist stopped mid-note. The councilman blinked wide-eyed. A fork hovered in the air at a nearby table. A glass paused halfway to a mouth. Even the waiter stopped breathing. Marco Graves grabbed Nora by the arm hard enough to make her wince and pulled her back one step. Who let you in here? He hissed. You little rat. Dante did not move at first. He simply stared at the plate, then slowly lifted his eyes to the child in Marco's grip. His gaze was not loud, but it was heavy enough to silence Marco without a word. Marco loosened his hold just slightly because even he did not like touching something. Dante was looking at Nora, swallowed, shaking her mouth dry. She stared at Dante, and for the first time she saw what real power looked like. Not loud, not angry, not chaotic, just stillness that made everyone else feel small. Dante spoke quietly. Why? Nora blinked because she did not expect his voice to be calm. She expected rage, she expected violence, she expected the kind of men who hurt children for breathing in the wrong place. But Dante was different in a way that made her more afraid. She forced the words out, it's poison. The councilman laughed nervously like a man trying to convince himself this was a joke. What is this, some kind of stunt? Get her out of here. Marco tightened again, ready to drag Nora away. Dante lifted one finger and Marco stopped instantly. Dante eyes never leaving Nora. How do you know? Nora took a shaky breath because the smell was still there, under the rich sauce, bitter chemical hidden behind spices. She pointed at the plate and then at the waiter who brought it, not because the waiter did it, but because she needed them to stop the plate from getting closer to Dante. The waiter stepped back, terrified, hands raised. I didn't do anything, I swear. Nora looked at Dante and her voice dropped to a whisper, but it cut deeper than her scream because it was truth. I saw the man in the kitchen, he put it in there. I saw him. Marco snapped. Who? What man? Tell me what man? Nora hesitated because she Had only seen a sleeve and a ring and a scar, but she had heard the voice and she would never forget it because it used a name she had never heard anyone say in this city. She said the name carefully like it was dangerous just to speak it. They called you Vico. The room went colder. The councilman stopped smiling. Marco Graves went still like a statue, and for the first time Dante's expression changed. Not much, not a gasp, not a shout, just a tiny tightening around the eyes, the kind that only people close enough to die could notice. Dante did not answer right away because no one alive used that name in public. The only people who knew it were men from a time when he was not a boss but a soldier in a war that never made the news. The only people who knew it were either dead or buried under new identities. Dante leaned forward slowly, elbows near the edge of the table, his voice lower now. Not for the restaurant, for the child alone who called me that. Nora swallowed and said the man who poisoned the food. Said it like a joke. He said Vico still eats first like he always did, and another man laughed and said yeah, Vico thinks he is untouchable. Marco Graves stepped closer, voice harsh. Where are they now? Where is this man? Nora pointed toward the service hallway. He was wearing a black coat. He has a scar on his neck like a line and a ring with a square stone, and he walked out the back door after he did it. Marco looked at Dante waiting for permission. Dante's gaze stayed on Nora for a heartbeat longer. Then he nodded once. Marco moved instantly, barking orders into his earpiece. Lock the exit, sweep the kitchen, bring me everyone now. The restaurant exploded into controlled chaos. Guards moved to doors, waiters backed away, customers stood confused, angry, frightened. Phones came out then disappeared when they saw guns. Dante did not care about their opinions. This was his world, and tonight someone tried to end it with a plate of food. Dante reached for the plate with 2 fingers and slid it away from himself without tasting it. The chef appeared from the kitchen, sweating, hands shaking. Sir, I swear on my life I would never. Dante looked at him coldly, then looked at the sauce and said quietly, you are not the target, the message is for me. Nora stood, shaking Marco's hand still on her arm but not crushing, now holding as if she was evidence or a weapon. Dante stood from his chair. The room seemed to shrink around him. He walked toward Nora slowly, and she fought the instinct to run because running from him felt impossible, like running from the ocean. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment he simply looked at her face, taking in the bruises on her wrist, the thinness of her cheeks, the way she held herself like a cornered animal ready to bite just to survive. He asked one more question softly, why did you warn me? Nora opened her mouth, and the answer came out before she could protect it because it was simple, and it was true. I don't like watching people die. I have seen enough of it. Dante stared at her, and something behind his eyes shifted like a door opening into a room he kept locked for years. He glanced at her hands and saw faint stains on her fingers from cleaning chemicals and old grime, a child working like a ghost. He turned slightly and spoke to Marco, take her with us. Marco frowned immediately. Boss, that is risky. We don't know who she is. She could be part of it. Nora flinched at those words, fear returning full force. She was used to being accused, used to being blamed. Dante did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He said, she saved my life. The risk is mine. Marco nodded once, understanding that argument in their world was over. A guard ran back from the kitchen, breathing hard. Boss, the back door was forced open. Whoever it was, they are gone. Dante looked toward the hallway, then back to Nora, his voice quiet but sharp. Did you see his face? Nora shook her head, not fully, only the scar and the ring and his voice. Dante nodded slowly, then asked the question that made Marco tense again. Did he have an accent? Nora thought hard, then nodded yes, a little. Like someone who used to live somewhere else. He sounded like he was smiling when he talked about you. Dante's eyes narrowed and the restaurant lights seemed dimmer suddenly because a name was forming in his mind, a ghost name, a man he watched burn 15 years ago, a man who should not be breathing, a man who knew the name Vico. Dante turned to Marco. Get the cars now. Marco signaled, and within seconds the room filled with movement, men in suits clearing a path. Dante placed one hand lightly on Nora's shoulder, guiding her, not pushing but claiming her space like protection whether she wanted it or not. Nora walked because she had no choice, and because for the first time in her life the most dangerous man in the room was walking beside her, not toward her. They reached the outside where cold air hit like a slap. The city night waited with wet streets and distant sirens. Black cars rolled up, engines humming like restrained beasts. Dante opened the back door and Nora hesitated, looking at the leather seats like she was stepping into a different universe. Dante leaned down slightly and spoke so only she could hear. You did the right thing. Nora swallowed, then asked in a tiny voice the first question that mattered. If they wanted to poison you, will they come for me now? Dante paused a beat, then said the truth. Yes. Her stomach dropped, her breath caught. Dante continued, but they will have to come through me first. The words should have comforted her, but they terrified her, because if men wanted to kill Dante Vescari, then what chance did a little girl like Nora have? She climbed into the car anyway because staying on the street was worse. Marco shut the door, and the convoy moved fast through the night. Dante stared out the window, thinking about the name Vico and the scar on the neck and the square ring and the laughter in the kitchen and the betrayal hidden inside his own world. Then his phone buzzed once. He looked down at the screen and his blood went cold. A message from an unknown number. You should have eaten Vico. Dante did not blink. He Showed the screen to Marco without a word. Marco read it and his face tightened. Dante looked at Nora sitting small in the corner watching the men around him trying to understand what kind of nightmare she just stepped into. Dante spoke softly to Marco but every word carried steel. Find who sent that? Marco nodded. Yes boss. Dante leaned back in the seat, eyes narrowing as the city lights slid past like distant stars, and he realized something. With terrifying clarity, this was not just an assassination attempt. This was a message from the past, and the past had finally found him again. The cars moved through the city like a dark river, headlights cutting across wet streets. Dante sat still in the back seat, but his mind was not still. It was racing through memories. He never allowed himself to revisit. Nora sat across from him, pressed into the corner, as if the leather could swallow her whole. She kept her eyes on his hands, his jaw, his face, trying to predict what kind of man he truly was. Because survival had taught her to read danger before it spoke. Marco Graves rode in the front seat, talking low into an earpiece, giving orders to men spread across the city. Lock down the restaurant, pull the kitchen staff, question everyone, check cameras, get the full guest list, trace the number that texted the boss, use every contact we have. Dante listened without reacting, but each word tightened the invisible net around his chest because he knew this was not just about tonight, it was about someone who should not exist, someone who knew the name Vico, someone who laughed about it like it belonged to him too. They reached a private compound near the river, disguised as an old shipping office from the outside, but inside it was a fortress. Steel gates, camera towers, reinforced doors, and men with weapons who did not look away. When the convoy arrived, the gate opened instantly and the cars rolled into the courtyard. Dante stepped out first, scanning the darkness with a calm that felt unnatural. Nora followed slowly, her shoes wet from the restaurant floor, her fingers still trembling. Marco reached for her arm to guide her, but Nora flinched hard and stepped back instantly, and Marco paused, surprised, because most people did not pull away from him like that. Dante glanced at Nora and then at Marco and said gently enough to be understood, "She walks on her own." Marco nodded and backed off. Inside the compound, the air smelled like oil and coffee and cold metal. Dante led Nora through a long hallway into a smaller room with a couch, a table, and a soft lamp. It was the closest thing to warm in the entire building. He motioned for her to sit. Nora remained standing for a moment, eyes scanning corners, counting exits, checking windows the way a child checks for monsters before she sleeps. Dante watched her like a man watching his own past reflected in someone else. He spoke quietly, "You are safe here for now." Nora did not answer. She asked a question instead. "Where is the back door?" He paused, then pointed down the hall. 2 turns left, 1 guarded all night. Nora nodded as if filing it away. Dante sat across from her, not too close, not too far, and said, "Tell me everything again from the beginning." Nora swallowed, then spoke slowly. "I was in the kitchen hallway because I clean for food. Sometimes I hide there when it's cold. I heard men talking. 2 of them. One said your name a lot, and one laughed. They said you were coming. They said you always take the first bite. They said it would look like your heart stopped." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Did you see them clearly?" Nora shook her head. "I saw one sleeve and the ring and the scar on his neck. The other I did not see. I only heard his laugh. It sounded like he liked hurting people." Dante asked, "Describe the ring." Nora lifted her hand, drawing an invisible shape, square, stone, dark, not shiny like black glass. Dante felt his stomach drop because he knew that ring. He had seen it years ago on a hand that pulled a trigger and smiled while doing it, a hand belonging to a man he had buried in fire. Marco entered the room quietly, his face tight with urgency. "Boss, we got the restaurant cameras, partial view of the kitchen door. Not full but enough to see a figure leaving the back with a black coat, and we found something else." Dante looked up. "What?" Marco hesitated, then said, "The chef is dead, boss, found in the alley behind the restaurant, throat cut, staged like a warning." Nora inhaled sharply, her eyes widening. She had been right about one thing: they would clean up, and they would clean up anyone who could talk. Dante stood slowly, the room feeling colder that fast. He looked at Nora and saw fear rising in her again, because now she understood this was not just a game between adults, this was blood. Dante spoke to Marco, "Bring the footage and bring the staff list." Marco nodded and left. Dante turned back to Nora. "You said you did not like watching people die." Nora nodded, swallowing hard. "Then you saved me anyway." Dante said quietly, "You could have stayed silent." Nora whispered, "I couldn't." Dante stared at her for a long beat, then said, "People who tried to poison me will not stop. They will look for the leak, they will look for the witness, and you are both." Nora flinched and then forced herself to ask, "What happens to me now?" Dante answered, "The truth. You stay with me until I know who did this and why." Nora's eyes flickered toward the door. She was calculating escape again. Dante saw it and spoke before she could move. "If you run, you will die." Nora froze, her chest rising and falling faster. "I have been running my whole life," she whispered. Dante nodded. "I know, and tonight you ran toward danger instead of away from it. That changes things." Nora did not know what to say, so she sat, finally, shoulders tense, hands clenched tight. Minutes later, Marco returned with a tablet and a stack of printed names. He placed them on the table and started playing the footage. The camera angle was high, grainy, but clear enough to show the kitchen back door, a man in a black coat exiting quickly. His head turned for a moment and the light caught his neck, the scar a thin line like a cut that healed wrong. Nora leaned forward, whispering, "That's him." Dante stared Hard the man moved like someone trained, not like a waiter, not like a cook, like someone who carried violence as second nature. Marco paused the footage and zoomed in as far as it would allow. The face was partially shadowed, but the jawline, the posture, the ring hand visible as he pushed the door open. Square, stone dark as night. Dante felt something old crawl up his spine. He could almost hear the laughter from years ago, the same laugh from a burning warehouse, and a man screaming that he would come back from hell. Marco said, "We traced the message number used to burner, but the signal bounced through 2 towers near the South Docks. Boss, that narrows it to your old territory." Dante nodded slowly, his mind connecting dots. The South Docks were where he fought his first war, where he built his name, where Vico was born, in the blood of men who underestimated him, and the only reason someone would pull him back there was revenge or control, or both. A guard knocked and stepped inside. Hurried, "Boss, we found something in the restaurant trash." A napkin folded with writing on it. Dante took it, unfolded it slowly, and read a few words written in thick black ink: "Eat and die, Vico." Nora watched his face and saw the stillness deepen into something colder, something more focused. Dante handed the napkin to Marco and asked one question: who had access to the table before the dish arrived? Marco answered quietly: the waiter, the chef, the sous chefs, the kitchen staff, and security. Dante did not blink. "And who chose the table placement tonight?" Marco hesitated, then said, "I did, boss. I placed you center like always." Dante stared at him long enough that the room tightened. Marco held his gaze without flinching because he was loyal, and he knew the boss needed to look at everyone like a suspect. Dante finally nodded and looked away. Then Nora spoke softly from the couch. "There was someone else." Dante turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Nora swallowed the words. "There was a woman. She wore a black dress. She walked into the kitchen like she belonged there. The men stepped aside for her. She said, 'It has to be done tonight or we lose our window,' and then she left. She had a perfume like roses and smoke." Dante went still. A woman with perfume like roses and smoke. He knew that scent too. It was not a scent you forget. It belonged to someone from his past, someone who knew his habits, his tastes, his weaknesses, someone who once sat at his side and promised loyalty until she vanished into the dark with a bag of money and a list of names. Marco asked the woman. Did Nora nod? "Yes, she had red hair, I think, and a scar near her ear, small like a burn." Dante closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, Marco saw the answer in his face and understood before the boss said it. "Her name is Celeste," Dante whispered, "and she should be dead." Nora watched them, confused, scared, because names meant nothing to her, but the way Dante said that name meant history and betrayal. Marco spoke carefully. "Boss, if Celeste is alive, then this is bigger than a hit. This is a takeover attempt." Dante nodded, and then said, "Yes, and it means someone inside my circle opened the door for her." Marco stiffened instantly. "You think we have a traitor?" Dante answered quietly. "I do not think I know." Dante turned and walked out of the room into the main operations hall lined with monitors, maps, schedules, codes, and men who lived by his commands. He raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Lock this place down. No one leaves without my word. Bring me the inner circle, all of them now." He turned to Marco and added quietly, "I want lists of every meeting planned this week, every shipment, every route, every account touched in the last month, and I want the names of everyone who knew I would be at that restaurant tonight." Marco nodded, moving fast. Nora sat alone again, feeling the walls close around her. She stared at her hands shaking slightly and wondered if she had made the worst decision of her life by screaming in that restaurant, because now she was trapped in a fortress of criminals surrounded by men who could kill without blinking, and yet she also felt something strange. She felt less alone than she had felt in years, because even though Dante was terrifying, he had looked at her like she mattered, like she was not trash, like she was not invisible. A few minutes later, Dante returned holding a small plate of food, bread and fruit, nothing fancy. He placed it on the table in front of Nora and said, "Eat." Nora stared at it. "Suspicious. You first," she said quietly. Dante paused, then sat across from her and tore a piece of bread and ate it slowly without breaking eye contact. Nora watched for any sign of pain, any trick. Then she finally took a small bite. Her stomach growled like it was angry with her for waiting so long. Dante observed, "You have not eaten today." Nora shook her head. "No." Dante nodded and said, "You said you have seen poison before." Nora lowered her eyes. "Yes." Dante asked where. Nora hesitated, then said, "Shelter, streets, men offering drinks to kids who had nowhere to go." Dante clenched his jaw but kept his voice calm. "You are not going back to that." Nora whispered, "You don't know that." Dante leaned forward and said softly, "I do." A door opened in the hallway. Voices rose, then stopped when Dante stepped out to meet them. Nora remained seated, listening as footsteps approached, heavy, cautious. A group of men entered the operations hall, figures of authority within Dante world, old friends, old soldiers, old predators. Each one greeted Dante with respect and fear. Dante stood at the center of them and spoke in a voice like steel. "Someone tried to poison me tonight, and they killed the chef. After they failed, which means the enemy is organized and close, and someone here opened the door." Silence fell thick enough to choke. Dante looked at each man one by one, then said, "We will find the traitor before sunrise, because if we do not, then the next attempt will not be a plate, it will be a bullet or a bomb, and it will hit someone else." He paused, then his eyes flicked toward Nora behind the glass door, watching him quietly, and he added, "And if any of you touch the child or speak her name outside. These walls you will die by my hand. The men shifted uneasy because protecting a child was not something Dante was known for. It was not his reputation, it was not his pattern, and that meant something was changing or something was broken. Marco stepped forward. Boss, we have a lead. Celeste was seen near the South Docks 2 hours ago. We have a car description and a safe house location. Dante did not hesitate. Bring the cars and bring my doctor. We are moving now. Nora rose quickly, fear rising again. Where are you going? Dante looked at her, and for the first time there was something almost gentle in his eyes. We are going to the place where my past is hiding, and we are going to pull it into the light. Nora whispered. What about me? Dante answered. You are coming with me because they will look for you first. Nora felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stand straight and said in a small voice, I can help. Dante paused, then asked how. Nora lifted her chin. I remember the laugh of the second man. I would know it if I heard it again. Dante stared at her for a beat, then nodded once. Good, then stay close to me and do exactly what I say. Nora nodded, even though her hand shook, even though her chest felt too tight to breathe, because she understood now this was not just about saving a mafia boss from poison. This was about a war from the past returning to take everything, and somehow a little girl who screamed at the right moment had become the spark that would set the whole city on fire. The convoy cut through the sleeping city toward the South Docks. Engines' low lights dimmed like predators moving before dawn. Nora sat between Dante and Marco in the back seat, feeling the vibration of the road in her bones. She held her hands together tight, not praying, not hoping, just steadying herself the way she always had when things went bad. Dante watched the streets pass, his mind locked on patterns, routes, exits, old scars, remembered every corner of this territory because this was where he was made and where he was almost erased. The docks rose ahead, cranes frozen like skeletal hands, containers stacked into dark walls, the smell of salt and fuel thick in the air. The cars rolled to a stop near a warehouse that should have been condemned years ago, but still drew power, still had fresh tire marks, still breathed with quiet activity. Marco murmured into his radio. Perimeter set, eyes everywhere. Dante nodded once and stepped out. Nora followed because he did not tell her not to, and because she had learned that sometimes staying close to danger was safer than being forgotten behind it. Inside the warehouse the air was colder, the lights flickered, weak men moved through shadows with practiced silence. Dante walked first, Nora half a step behind him, her eyes scanning, her ears sharp for sound. She heard voices ahead, low, urgent, arguing. Dante lifted a hand and everyone froze, then he moved closer until the words sharpened. One voice, calm, amused, female, another male, nervous, desperate. Nora felt her stomach drop because she recognized the laugh even before the voice finished a sentence. It was the same laugh from the kitchen, the one that liked hurting people. She whispered without thinking, that one, that is him. Dante turned his head just enough to acknowledge her, then stepped forward into the light. Celeste stood near a folding table, map spread across it, red hair pulled back, black coat, perfectly fitted, eyes bright with confidence. When she saw Dante she smiled like she had been waiting all night. Vico, she said softly, you always did arrive early. Dante did not flinch. You are supposed to be Ash. Celeste laughed, a musical sound. You always were dramatic. You never did know when to let go. Dante eyes cut to the man beside her, a thin, nervous figure with slick hair and a too expensive watch. He recognized him instantly, one of his own inner circle, a logistics handler named Evan Cole. The realization hit like a dull knife, not sharp, not surprising, just heavy. Evan avoided Dante's eyes, sweating through his shirt. Celeste continued, you see, Dante, people change, cities change, empires rot. You built something impressive, but you grew sentimental. She gestured toward Nora with a casual flick of her hand, like pointing at furniture. You even brought a child to a war. Dante's voice was flat. You tried to poison me, and you killed a man who cooked for me. Celeste shrugged. Collateral damage. The chef was nothing. Evan flinched at that word. Dante's eyes burned into Evan. Why? Evan whispered, shaking. Because you were going to replace me. You didn't say it, but I saw it in the numbers, in the routes. You were cutting me out. Celeste smiled at Evan, indulgent. He is not wrong, Dante. You reward loyalty, but you do not share power, and men like Evan do not like waiting. Dante took a step forward. Celeste took one back, but kept smiling. You always did underestimate how tired people get of kneeling. She lifted her chin. We needed you gone. Quietly, the poison would have done that, but then your little angel screamed. Nora felt her chest tighten. Celeste looked at her with open curiosity. You have good instincts, child, too good. Nora held Dante's sleeve without realizing it. Dante placed his hand lightly over hers, grounding her. Celeste noticed and laughed again. Look at you, Vico, protecting something fragile. You never did that before. Dante said, this ends tonight. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Does it? Because you see, Evan here gave us everything, schedules, routes. Tonight was just the beginning. We have men positioned all over your operations. Even if you kill us, others will finish it. Dante studied Evan calmly, then said, you sold everything for fear. Evan snapped back, you made me disposable. Celeste cut in, enough of this. We do not have time for speeches. She raised a hand and men stepped from behind containers. Guns raised, chaos snapped into place. Dante pushed Nora behind him. Instantly Marco and the others fanned out, weapons drawn, shots rang out, metal screamed, bullets tore through crates. Nora covered her ears, heart slamming, but she stayed on. Her feet, because running meant dying, she pressed herself against the cold wall, watching Dante move with terrifying precision. Directing men, firing when needed, ducking, advancing. Celeste vanished into the shadows. Evan dropped to his knees, screaming. It was her idea, it was her plan. Dante moved toward him, gun steady. Evan sobbed. I only wanted a way out. Dante leaned down, eyes ice cold. There was a way, you chose betrayal. Dante fired once. Evan fell silent. Nora screamed despite herself, the sound tearing out of her, but Dante was already turning back to the fight. Marco shouted, "Boss, Celeste is moving to the west exit." Dante grabbed Nora's arm, firm, protective. Stay with Marco, he ordered. She nodded, obeying for once. Dante sprinted after Celeste, boots pounding across concrete. Nora watched him disappear, fear clawing her insides, because if Dante fell there would be nothing left between her and the men who wanted her erased. Minutes felt like hours. Shots echoed, then stopped. Silence fell thick, broken only by distant sirens. Marco cursed under his breath and signaled for teams to sweep. Nora stood shaking, every sense alive. Then she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Dante emerged from the darkness, coat torn, blood on his knuckles, eyes burning. Celeste was nowhere behind him. Marco asked, "Is she?" Dante shook his head. "She escaped." Nora felt dread sink deep. Celeste had lived, she had seen Nora, she would not forget her. Dante walked to Nora, knelt slightly. "So they were." Eye level, his voice steady. "Listen to me, they will try to use you again. They will come quietly or loudly, but they will come." Nora whispered, "I don't want anyone else to die." "Because of me," Dante replied. "You did not, 'cause this you revealed it that matters." He stood and turned to Marco. "Lock everything down, move operations underground, double protection on all safe houses." Marco nodded. Then Dante looked back at Nora and said something that stunned everyone. "You stay with me from now on, not because you are leverage, but because you are under my protection permanently." Nora searched his face for lies and found none, only certainty and something like responsibility settling into him like armor. She nodded, because for the first time since she could remember, someone was choosing her, not using her. The convoy moved again back toward the compound, dawn beginning to creep into the sky. Nora leaned against the window, exhausted. Dante sat beside her, silent but present. She whispered one question, the one that had been burning since the restaurant. "Why did that name scare you?" Dante looked out at the river and answered quietly, "Vico was who I was before I learned mercy, and Celeste wants that man back." Nora closed her eyes, understanding that the real war had just begun, and somehow she was standing at its center, not as bait, not as a mistake, but as the reason everything had changed. Morning crept over the river like a cautious witness, pale light sliding across steel and water as the convoy returned to the compound. Nora felt the exhaustion hit her all at once, the kind that makes bones feel hollow and thoughts drift like smoke. Dante moved with the same steady pace he always did, but something in him had shifted. The fight at the docks had confirmed what he already knew. The past was not finished with him. And Celeste was not running, she was repositioning. Inside the compound, men moved faster, voices lower, eyes sharper. The fortress felt awake, now alive with tension. Marco coordinated teams, checking weapons, routes, cameras. Dante took Nora into the small room again, but this time he did not leave her alone. He sat across from her and spoke plainly. "Celeste will try again, and she will not be subtle." Nora nodded, hugging her knees. "What does she want from me?" Dante answered the truth. "She wants me angry, reckless. She wants me to chase ghosts. She wants to turn you into a weakness." Nora lifted her head. "Then I should leave?" Dante shook his head. "No, leaving makes you vulnerable. And that is what she wants." He leaned forward, his voice softer than she expected. "You are safest where my eyes can reach you." Nora searched his face, the scars, the calm, the danger, and asked, "Why are you doing this for me?" Dante paused longer than usual, because the answer was not tactical, it was human. "Because you told the truth when silence would have kept you alive. And because I know what it costs to be ignored when you are small." Nora absorbed that quietly. A guard interrupted. "Boss, we found something." Dante followed him to the operations hall, screens lit with maps and intercepted messages. Marco pointed to a highlighted route. "Celeste hit one of our cash drops last night, took nothing left, a mark, a calling card." Dante studied the symbol burned into a crate, a simple square carved deep. Nora stiffened. "The ring?" she whispered. Dante nodded. "Yes, she wants me to know she can touch anything." Marco added, "There is more, a witness from the docks claims he saw a woman with red hair speaking to a priest near the old mission." Nora frowned. "A priest?" Dante eyes narrowed. "The mission was neutral ground, protected by old rules. Celeste was daring him to break them." Dante said, "Prepare a quiet approach, no guns visible, we talk first." Marco hesitated, then nodded. They moved before noon, 2 cars only. Dante, Marco, and Nora kept low profiles. The mission stood worn and peaceful among warehouses, its bells silent. Nora felt eyes on her. As they entered the courtyard, a priest emerged, calm, gray-haired, hands open. "Welcome, Dante Vescari," he said, as if greeting an old neighbor. Dante replied, "We seek Celeste. She is here." The priest hesitated, then nodded. "She came seeking sanctuary and confession." Nora felt a chill. Dante said, "Sanctuary is not a Shield for murder, the priest answered. Neither is revenge. A prayer passed through the air. Dante stepped inside the cool stone hall. Candles flickered. Celeste stood near the altar, unarmed, smiling, as if she owned the place. Vico, she said, you brought the child. Nora felt her spine stiffen. Dante said, leave her out of this. Celeste circled slowly. You put her in it the moment you spared her life. Dante corrected her. I chose differently. Celeste laughed softly. Then your weakness grows. Dante replied, maybe your blindness does. Celeste's eyes flashed. She leaned toward Nora. You should be afraid of him, little one, when he remembers who he was. Nora surprised herself by answering, I am afraid of you. Celeste paused, then smiled wider. You will learn. Dante stepped between them. This ends now. Celeste shrugged. I only wanted you to see the board. The city is tired of you. Vico, the deals, the ghosts, the fear. There are men ready to replace you. Dante said, they already tried. Celeste sighed, pitying, then whispered, the child is the key. Nora felt Dante tense. Celeste continued, kill me, and you prove my point. Spare me, and I will keep touching your world until it bleeds. Dante studied her a long moment, then spoke to the priest. She leaves now without protection. The priest looked between them, then nodded slowly. Sanctuary ends at the door. Celeste scoffed and walked past Dante, brushing his shoulder as she passed. You cannot protect her forever, she murmured, and vanished into daylight. Outside, Marco moved in, but Dante stopped him. Let her go, Marco protested. Boss, Dante said, she wants pursuit, she wants spectacle. We deny her both. As they returned to the cars, a shot cracked. Nora flinched. Marco spun, but Dante had already moved, pulling Nora down behind the hood. Bullets sparked against stone. Dante shouted, cover. Celeste had left a sniper watching to test him. Dante waited, counting breaths, then pointed. Marco took the angle. 2 shots later, silence fell. Nora trembled. Dante checked her quickly, unhurt, then said calmly, she wanted to see if I would chase. I did not. He looked toward the rooftops. The war would be quiet now, crueler for it. Back at the compound, Dante made changes fast. Routes altered, faces replaced, rules rewritten. Nora watched as men obeyed without question. She realized this was leadership, not shouting but clarity. Dante returned to her as evening fell and said, you need to learn how to stay safe. Nora nodded. I want to help. Dante considered, then handed her a small radio and taught her code signals, where to stand, how to listen. He said, if you hear that laugh again, you tell me first. Nora agreed. Later that night, alarms sounded, brief, then quiet. Marco reported false trigger. Celeste testing edges. Dante stood by the window watching lights flicker across the river. Nora joined him, afraid to speak. Dante said softly, you did not choose this, Nora, but you are strong enough to stand in it. Nora replied, I don't want to be brave, I want it to stop. Dante placed a steady hand on her shoulder. It will, but only if we finish it the right way. He turned, resolve set. She wants the old me to come back. I will not give her that. I will end this without becoming him. Nora looked up at him and believed that was possible for the first time. The city outside breathed, unaware that a child and a king of shadows had just refused the path everyone expected, and in doing so changed the rules of the war to come. Night fell, clean and quiet, the kind of quiet that meant the city was holding its breath. Dante stood at the center of the operations hall watching the feeds. Nora beside him, listening to the radio codes he taught her hours earlier. She was calmer now. Not fearless but focused. The alarms did not scream anymore, they whispered. Celeste had stopped testing edges, which meant she was ready to strike for real. Marco approached with measured steps. Boss, we have confirmation. Celeste is moving tonight. She contacted 2 lieutenants cut out of your network, promised them control if they delivered the child. Dante nodded once and felt the last piece slide into place, where Nora was not bait but the truth. Celeste could not stand that he chose mercy over vengeance. Dante said quietly, then we end it without blood if we can. Marco hesitated, then nodded, trusting him, even if he did not understand the plan. Dante turned to Nora. Listen to me, you will stay where you are seen, you will be watched, but you will not be alone. I will be close. Nora asked, what if she comes? Dante answered, then she will finally have to speak the truth. They moved to the old river warehouse, the one Dante rebuilt into a decoy. Space lights on doors, open, guards visible, and cameras. Obvious, everything Celeste would expect. Nora sat at a table under a warm lamp, hands folded, radio clipped to her sleeve. She felt small but steady. Dante took position behind glass, one wall away, visible but not reachable. The trap was honesty. Celeste arrived without ceremony, a black coat, a confident stride, a smile sharpened by certainty. She stepped into the light and stopped when she saw Nora alone. She laughed softly. You learn fast, little one. Nora lifted her chin. You tried to kill him, Celeste replied. I tried to free the city, Nora said, by killing him and using me. Celeste smiled, because you matter to him and that makes you powerful. Dante stepped into view, then not with a gun but with his hands open. Celeste's eyes narrowed. You finally show yourself, Vico. Dante said, use my name again. And you admit this is about you, not the city. Celeste scoffed. I made you. Celeste said, I burned with you, I bled with you, and you left me behind. Dante answered, I chose to stop burning everything around me. Celeste snapped, and chose a child. Dante nodded yes. Celeste stepped closer, voice trembling now raw. You think mercy makes you king, it makes you weak. Dante shook his head. It makes me finished with you. Celeste laughed bitterly, then signaled, and men stepped from shadows, guns half raised. Dante did not move. Marco did not rush. Nora stayed still. Dante spoke to the men. Put the guns down. None of you are safe after tonight. If you fire, you prove her right. Silence stretched. One man lowered his weapon, then another. Celeste screamed cowards and raised her own gun at Nora. Dante moved faster than thought, not firing, not charging, but stepping between Nora and the barrel. Celeste froze, shocked. Dante's voice was calm. And this, Celeste's eyes flicked to the cameras, to the men, to the child, who did not flinch. Celeste saw it then. She had already lost because fear had failed. She lowered the gun, hands shaking, and whispered, "You changed the rules." Dante replied, "You changed nothing. You refused to change yourself." Marco stepped in and disarmed her. Clean, quiet. The city exhaled. Hours later, dawn touched the river. Nora slept in a chair, blanket around her. Dante sat nearby, watching light return. Marco approached. "We will hand her to the authorities." Quietly, no spectacle. Dante nodded. "Good." Marco paused, then said, "The men who came for the child, they want out." Dante said, "Let them leave. Clean. The city needs less ghosts." Nora woke and looked at Dante. "Is it over?" Dante answered, "Yes. The part that needed fear is over." Nora asked, "What happens to me?" Dante considered, then said, "You stay if you want, you go if you want, but no one hunts you anymore." Nora looked at the river, then back at him. "I want to stay a while." Dante nodded, then welcome. Nora smiled. Small. Real. Weeks later, the restaurant reopened. The city moved on. Rumors faded. A man who should have died was still alive, and a little girl went to school near the river. Dante ate first bites without fear, and sometimes he listened to laughter that was not cruel and learned that power could pause and choose differently. The past did not win. It was named and left behind. Thank you for staying with us through this story of courage, truth, and unexpected mercy. If Nora's warning and Dante's choice moved you, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, which country, which city. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Remember, sometimes one small voice can stop a terrible ending, and sometimes choosing mercy is the bravest power of all. See you in the next story.